Ingrid Bergman had a freshness and vulnerability. She was able to project that quality all of her life. Millions of movie fans recognized it and adored her for it. But Ingrid the woman was more complex. My mother sometimes compared herself to a train moving down the track. Nothing and no one could stop her once her mind was made up. Whether it concerned changing her looks, a film role, a marriage, banishment from her adopted America, or separation from her children, she had a determination of steel. One could call her stubborn, or one could say that above all, she trusted her own inner voice. She would not listen to the guidance of others. Those of us who lived with her knew this. And when, toward the end of her life, she endured serious illness, Ingrid Bergman was determined to live and to die her own way.
I was so happy to have gotten out of reality and come into my world of imagination that I had lived with since I was a child, that I felt at home. The camera never frightened me. I have never had any fear.
I've thought about it, and it seems to me that my mother was fated to be an actress in a certain way, because the way she saw her own family was always through a lens or on photographs. Her father, his name was Justus Bergman, was a painter and a very early photographer, and he had a photographic studio in Stockholm. And he used my mother a lot as a model, so when she was young, he would pose her either holding a newspaper or putting on glasses or a funny hat. And he took moving pictures of her when she was 1 and 2 years old. My mother had a little bit of film footage of her own mother, but that's the only memory that she ever had of her mother. Friedel, my mother's mother, died when Ingrid was only 3. She has film showing her as a child going to the graveyard to see her mother's grave. And I know that my mother looked at those pictures over and over again. And then her father died when she was 13. So all she had left of her father was his photographs of her and the moving pictures.
She always had a photo of them by the bed, and then when my mother died and we collected her things, we noticed that they was full of traces of her lips. She probably had been kissing them.
That must have been the closest that she could get to family life, and it was always seen through a lens, always seen through photographs. When she looked at her father, it would have been through the lens of his camera.
Yes, I was a very sad child and very lonely, and how I saved myself was to invent the characters that I could talk to, because I was terribly shy.
Sometimes it doesn't affect you when you're somebody else, when you could put on the clothes and the character and the words of another person.
Sometimes I was the poor beggar, and sometimes I was the lonely mother. And then, as I grew a little older, I started to read things and learn by heart. Poems, always very dramatic poems. And I read monologues out of plays, or I took pieces, just a short story, and I dramatized it. My father, he took me to the opera. He wanted me to become an opera singer. And I was very unhappy about it, and I took singing lessons.
At the beginning, she thought she was going to be a singer because she has never seen actors. She grew up at a time where there was no television and very little films, so she was brought to the opera. And when she saw those people on stage, she wanted to go on stage and sing. And then one day she was brought to the theater and she saw people speaking, not singing. And she said, "Oh my God, I don't have to sing. I can just act. That's what I want to do."
And that is how I became an actress, not knowing what I was doing was acting. But I always lived with all these characters in my fantasy.
My mother was 15 when she found work as an extra at the movie studio in Stockholm. She said she could not believe that she'd been paid to have so much fun. At 17, my mother was accepted into Stockholm's Royal Dramatic School, but the prospect of 5 years more schooling was not appealing. The memory of working at the film studio was vivid, and when the offer came for a speaking part in a movie, Ingrid took it, against the advice of her teachers.
They were so angry with me when I wanted to leave. But you see, when you're young, you're in a great hurry. And I was so anxious to right away get big parts and be a well-known actress. Sure of myself I was. I was so happy to have gotten out of reality and come into my world of imagination that I had lived with since I was a child, that I felt at home. The camera never frightened me, and everybody thought it was very funny when I did my very first scene that I was going around so happy and not at all frightened. That stayed with me. I have never had any fear.
And I think I heard her say, "Well, see, I always knew I was going to become famous," which I thought shocked me. I said, "Well, this sounds so pretentious." And my mother was anything but pretentious. She was very simple. You know, there was a simplicity about her that was terribly disarming. I can understand wanting to know, since you are a child, wanting to be an actor or wanting to be a musician, but to have this absolute certitude, in total modesty, that she was going to be so different, that she was going to be noticed for her differences.
When she married my father, she was still very much a girl. She was 18. She was living with relatives. They were protective of her. My father was teaching dentistry when he met my mother. My father, I think, represented very much stability and knowledge and somebody who seemed intelligent and capable. And I don't think she'd been out a lot. It's understandable why my father would fall in love with her. She was very beautiful and had that vulnerable quality and that youth and talent and enthusiasm. She had a wonderful sense of humor. You know, she was just fun to be with. And one of the things my mother kept all of her life was a childlike quality. And I think that all great actors and actresses have that too. They are able to be children. And that feeling of let's play, my mother carried that through all her life. Let's have a good time. My mother was fixated on her acting career, and I don't know how much she sentimentalized my birth. As I knew her, she was most happy on a set. I think when she wasn't working, she felt she wasn't doing anything. She was wasting time.
I just thought that she had an incredible drive. She was an artist, you know, and I always imagined an artist as being somebody who needs to do paint or write. They cannot help it.
When she was very young, she actually was very vulnerable, and she retained all her life the inner core of vulnerability. After she began to hear her voices and she began to assume the garb of other characters, she was able to go into the world with this force that she also had, a driving force, seeing one path, knowing where she was going, being defined by her work, clearly right from the beginning. There was little doubt in my mother's mind. The move to the United States would change our lives. But she saw it was the chance of a lifetime, one she believed she had to take. In May 1939, Ingrid Bergman arrived in New York. She was 24 years old, and she traveled alone, carrying one suitcase. Producer David O. Selznick was eager to meet the young Swedish actress. He had agreed to star in a remake of Intermezzo. My father and I remained in Sweden, where he was in training to become a brain surgeon.
I don't know where I got my determination and strength from. I was so young and I wanted so much to try my wings in Hollywood, but immediately I was considered too tall, and they were going to do something with my face and change my name. And when I heard all that, I got terribly frightened, and I said, I want to go back, I don't want to do all that. So I refused and refused and refused, and then they accepted my name and what I looked like. And then Selznick looked at all the tests that he did before intermezzo and decided that the left side was the best side.
A day to remember always.
I can't bear to see it end.
And so whenever we had a close-up in intermezzo, it was always that side that was turned to the camera. I arrived in Hollywood exactly at the right time because they had all these actresses that were so made up. And everything was so phony in a way. And I came there and I was completely natural.
Once my mother then came to the United States and started working and was successful in a few of her early films, she began to express herself more and more about what she wanted to do and the kind of movie she wanted to do. Because the way she was being presented to the public was something like a Swedish milkmaid. Good-hearted, sweet, family girl, just home, you know, all the time. And they didn't know what to do with it because when they couldn't turn her into a glamour puss, they sort of decided, okay, let's go with the country girl.
I was just the simple girl, the refugee, and the good girl. And I got very, very tired of always being so good. When they cast me in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Lana Turner was going to play the little barmaid, and I was going to play Dr. Jekyll's fiancée, who was a very nice girl. And I was by then so fed up with it and terribly worried because I didn't want to be typecast. I wanted to be an actress and play everything.
You aren't half a fast one, aren't you?
I forgot to mention, my friend and I are physicians.
Physicians?
Mm-hmm. Doctors.
Doctors? Oh, go on. Oh, I thought you were a couple of tops.
No. Haven't the leisure.
Oh, damn me. And here I thought...
And I was terribly pleased because more people told me, you were not in that picture. Yeah. No. And I said, who was it then? Well, I can't remember her name. They didn't recognize me.
Here is hoping that Dr. Jekyll thinks of his Ivy. As I know he'd like to.
The next part my mother played called upon her to choose between loyalty to her husband and romantic love. My mother had no idea that the picture would become a film classic.